As context for understanding the Puritan conversion narratives, I want to discuss the Protestant Reformation in some detail. So you can look back at your textbook to think about it, but I want to say a few important points here. So, first of all, the Protestant Reformation occurred at a time when there were a lot of different kinds of political, social, and even technological changes that played a huge role in it, at least the way that the Protestant Reformation took place, and perhaps even the sense that it was possible. So at this time, princes were vying more and more with the church for power. So, although states would often be officially part of one religion, that doesn't mean that the church ran those different kingdoms. And so there was always some tension between kings who wanted to run their empire as they saw fit, and then the church's idea about how different kingdoms, or perhaps all kingdoms, should be run. And in that time, the amount of land that the church had control over was continually shrinking. So, by the 20th century, we see the Vatican as a place that has basically no land. And there's a total transformation by then. But we're starting to see sort of less and less land, although still a good amount in what we would call Italy today, that the church was able to control, but that was separate from other kingdoms. So, kind of going along with the fact that princes are vying for power, we can say that there's a kind of proto nationalism developing, that people are beginning to have an idea of belonging to their state, the idea of nations existing and that having some kind of intimate link with statehood or citizenship. Although we don't see quite as much freedom for people for a while, there's also a growing amount of individualism. So that's to say that individuals actually matter, that they don't, people are not just part of a collective, but that each of us matters individually. This is an idea that's developing and really explodes with the Protestant Reformation. But one of the big things that I want to point to is the development of the printing press. That really, without the printing press, without that new technology, so many different aspects of the Protestant Reformation could never have occurred. So part of what Protestants began to do was to circulate all kinds of ideas and pamphlets. You need to have movable type printing press to be able to do that. And moreover, we see a huge emphasis on translating the Bible. So, one of the best known figures of the Protestant Reformation is Martin Luther. Luther was a German monk who had a kind of tremendous experience, promising God that if he would save him from a lightning storm, that he would dedicate his life to God, which he did. And he posted in 1517 a set of what are called the 95 Theses. So, like, way before there was Jay-Z and his 99 Problems, there was Martin Luther and his 95 Theses. So these were really all basically complaints against the church and the way that it was operating. So one of the big issues at the time was the kind of system of repentance or penitence in the church. That the church at this moment was incredibly wealthy. And one of the reasons it was wealthy was due to a policy of selling what were called indulgences. There were a lot of other complaints that a lot of people had, both people who became Protestants and people who remained within the Catholic Church. But the indulgences are really symbolic, that they were a critique of how much money the church had and how that didn't seem to square with the kind of life that Jesus had lived and preached. but that also seemed problematic for basically allowing people to purchase their redemption. So in the Catholic system of penitence, one would go to a priest and confess one's sins. This would still be an important practice for many Catholics. And at the time, one of the kind of solutions a priest might offer after a confession of sins, while it might be to say a certain number of prayers to right the wrong that had been done, something like that, it could also be that a person could buy what was called an indulgence, and so basically pay off their sins. There were lots and lots of people who had complaints about this practice, but it is one of the reasons why the church was so wealthy. So the church was not really eager, or at least some members of the kind of upper part of the institution of the church were not eager to do away with indulgences. So Luther said basically, if the Catholic Church wasn't going to change this system and move toward one that looked more individualistic, that was more kind of humble in its visual culture, as well as just the sort of role that the church would play in people's lives, that he couldn't remain a part of it. So he was excommunicated by the church, which is a little bit fine with him. But also, he didn't necessarily want to start a new movement of Christianity. These were really complaints that many other Catholics shared with him, and so he wanted to see a reformation within the church. But what wound up happening, in sort of, he's symbolic in a way of a lot of other people. So for all of those people who had these complaints and really felt firm about them, the church couldn't just say do away with indulgences in general, but needed to do away with the whole system of penitence. Uh, this wasn't something that would happen for the church. It would even challenge certain Catholic theology. And so Luther and his followers wind up really creating this new movement, one that becomes really revolutionary for Christianity and for the history of the world.